Welcome to the continuation of the October 12th, 2021 Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting. We are now on item 13, Public Works. 13A is a third reading and public hearing on ordinance number 21-07 in the matter of amending Lane Code 16.244, floodplain combining zone, FPRCP, and Lane Code 10.271, floodplain combining district, FP, and adopting a savings and severability clause and declaring an emergency. File number 509-PA21-05390, PM and NBA 12/15/2020, 8/31/2021, 9/21/2021. Forgive me. This is a public hearing. Today's date is October 12th, 2021. The proposed Lane Code amendments are subject to the applicable criteria identified in Lane Code 16.252(2) and applicable statewide planning goals. The order of proceedings for this hearing will be first the report by staff, followed by public testimony, and then additional comments by staff. The board's decision may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals in accordance with ORS Chapter 197. At this time, I have to call for the disclosure of any commissioner abstentions due to conflicts of interest or biases. Are there any? Let the record show there are none. At this time, are there any challenges to the board's qualifications to hear this matter? Seeing and hearing none, it is time for the staff report then, and Ms. Scherslav, if you would.
Thank you, Chair Burney, and good afternoon, Commissioners. This is Rachel Scherslav, Staff Planner for the Floodplain Code Amendment Project. And staff is back before you for a third reading and continued public hearing of Ordinance 2107. And staff was last before you on this project on September 21st for a second reading and public hearing. And at that meeting, the board approved the second reading of the ordinance and motioned to add an emergency clause that would make the code effective immediately upon passing of the ordinance. And I'll just note that that change has been made in the ordinance that's before you today. And before I dive into the details of my staff report, I am going to hand it over to Amber Bell, Planning Director, as she has a few comments on the project.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners, Amber Bell, Planning Director. Before Ms. Scherslav provides her full staff report, I wanted to make just a few remarks regarding the overall code modernization project of which this code update is a part. As some of you may recall, several years ago, we kicked off the code modernization project. That's a multi-year long-range work plan item to comprehensively overhaul Lane Code Development Code. The project has been and will continue to be in phases, and it began with Lane Code Chapter 13, 14, and Chapter 16 resource zone updates. The next phase has been the updates to the floodplain siting standards that are currently before you, and future efforts will include updates to Lane Code developed and committed exception code in the Lane Code 290 series, as well as other sections of the code. One of the main goals of the project has been to streamline development processes, make the code more navigable and user-friendly, and using clear language as much as is possible. In some cases, we must apply terminology directly from state or federal law, and it's not possible to avoid jargon or vague land use code. But if that's the case, we try to provide handouts and forms both online and in our offices, and mail forms and handouts to customers as much as is helpful to them, to help them through the process. And we try to clarify terms wherever we can in the code. I wanted to provide this context because we heard and understand the concerns at the last hearing with regard to the lack of clarity around the term footprint. Initially, we looked into defining this term, as we mentioned at the last hearing, but initially we didn't attempt to do so as part of this round of code updates because we understood that there might be additional noticing requirements that could add substantial cost and time to this code amendment effort. However, since the last hearing, we have researched this further. We've discussed the matter with County Council, and we believe we have identified a potential definition for the floodway replacement dwelling provision that would provide clarity on the meaning of the term for that provision, while at the same time avoiding the need for a new Measure 56 notice to all floodway properties. While this ultimately is a decision for the board, I will mention one downside to further revising the code at this time is that it would require one additional reading at the very least. But on a positive note, the solution proposed by staff today would allow this issue and the related board assignment to be addressed at this time rather through a future code amendment effort. So I'm happy to answer any questions about this at this time. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to Ms. Surslev, who will now present the details of this proposal.
Before Ms. Surslev begins, are there any questions for Ms. Bell? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. This is Rachel Surslev again, and I'm going to talk in detail about the language that we are proposing. So we have found an avenue to define the term footprint, and how we're able to do this is by making it consistent with how we've been interpreting that term in practice. And I've provided some of the draft language on the slide in front of you. In practice, the Land Management Division has defined footprint as where the foundation of a structure meets the ground. And according to our code, well, this is based off of Webster's Third New International Dictionary, which is the dictionary that Lane Code specifies using for when a term is undefined by Lane Code. And Webster's definition defines footprint as an impression of the foot on a surface. And so in the context of construction, the Land Management Division interprets this as meaning where the foundation of a building meets the ground. In the proposed language that I have up on the screen, we have also provided clarity on how this would apply to manufactured dwellings where there may be no foundation to base the footprint on. So we clarified that the footprint is where the skirting for a manufactured dwelling meets the ground. Further, there may be instances where a walled or enclosed area exists outside of the foundation of a building. So staff wanted to account for these areas in the footprint definition because these enclosed areas would have an effect on the flow of floodwaters. And one example of this is that in some older stick-built dwellings, they might have attached porches that are not necessarily built on the house's foundation, but they may have siding that encloses the area of the porch, and that siding can displace or restrict floodwaters. So with this proposed language, that area of the dwelling would be counted towards the footprint of the structure. So those are kind of the three options that we've incorporated into the definition of footprint. And as you can see, we are still proposing a 20% expansion to the footprint for replacement structures in the floodway. And as Ms. Bell stated, this language could be read into the ordinance today if the board wants to address this issue with this code amendment project. And by reading this in today, the ordinance would have to return for a fourth reading in order to incorporate the new language. And just moving into some of the options going forward, we do have a continued public hearing today. So an option would, or a motion should be made to either close or continue the public hearing. And then other options include passing the ordinance as written, which includes that emergency clause language, or to read in the provided draft language regarding footprint, in which case we would have to set a fourth reading for the amendments. And that concludes my staff report now, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scherslav. At this time, we are providing for public testimony regarding the Lane Code floodplain combining zone amendments. And after that, any additional comments by staff. Ms. Jones, are there people that would like to provide testimony?
Thank you, Chair Burney. At this time, if you have signed up for public testimony for this item, please raise your virtual hand and I will call upon you to present. I do see one hand up. Tim Hooker, I will unmute your microphone and you can begin your public testimony. I do show you are self-muted. There you go.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, well, Chair Burney and Commissioner Jay Bozovich, he's kind of helped me with some comments through this process, but I'm talking about the compensatory fill requirements that Commissioner Bozovich enacted the emergency clause on the last meeting. I'm one of the people that's really been affected. I applied for a pole barn permit the last week of April, which was before the county opened back up for in-person meetings. And I still don't have a permit for that because of the compensatory fill. I'm on about a 2/3 of an acre lot, which doesn't allow much room for backup sanitation stuff and to put a shop and to dig a hole for compensatory fill. So I'm just hoping that you guys will do the emergency clause on the compensatory fill. And I'm hoping that if the language on the 20% that you guys are talking about, if that needs a fourth reading, I'm hoping that that can be separated from the compensatory fill so we can hopefully get permits issued and start building on my property. Like I said, I applied the last week of April and kind of hoped I'd be building in June or July. And here we are, middle of October already and hitting Oregon's rainy season. So anyways, I appreciate everything you guys are doing. I appreciate Commissioner Bozovich for the help that you've given me and your support. So I will yield it back over. I just thank you guys for your help.
Thank you for your public comments. At this time, I do not see any other hands raised. If you did sign up to give public testimony for this item, please raise your virtual hand and I will call on you. Chair Burney, I do not see any other hands being raised, so I will return to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ms. Jones. Thank you very much, Mr. Hooker, for your comments. Are there any additional comments by staff at this time?
This is Rachel Scherslav. Thank you. I think our only response would be to reiterate if we could make any necessary corrections that we can in this code amendment project. I think that would be staff's preference at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, am I to close the public hearing before we have discussion and action by the board? Forgive me.
Chair, excuse me, Chair Burney, Andy Clark. You don't need to close the public hearing now. You can if the board desires, but you, as long as it's done before, either you close it or continue it before the end of the meeting or hearing today. That's all right.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. So that means we can go on with discussion and action by the board, correct?
Yes. In fact, sometimes the discussion may lead you to decide whether or not you want to keep or continue the hearing or not. So that's why I could leave it open.
Well, forgive my brain fog, commissioners. Would any commissioners like to speak to this? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the additional information. We did talk about separating out the variance and footprint discussion last time, and due to trying to speed up the corrections that are currently presented in the material, I still have questions about coming up with 20% versus 10% or another percentage. I'm very comfortable moving it the way that it's currently written. I would still prefer to have those other discussions on footprint and variance separately. Open to hearing what other commissioners have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Other commissioners? Commissioner Bozovich. You're muted, Commissioner.
Sorry, I thought I hit the button.
You did. You hit the wrong one, though.
I had to cursor right over it, but it just, I must not have hit the mouse hard enough. Sorry. So I just want to say I'm in agreement with Commissioner Buck. I too want to have a little bit more discussion about definitions and variances. And that was one of the reasons why I made the motion I did a couple weeks ago to try and move this along, adding the emergency clause. Mr. Hooker is not the only person I'm aware of that's waiting on a building permit based on us getting that portion of the compensatory fill language out of the code. So I would doubt that we would get just one more reading to resolve that issue around variance and the footprint description, because I'm sure that we'll see a lot of, now it's actually out in writing to the public, that we may see some public input on those descriptions that we haven't seen yet. So I'm not sure one reading is enough. And I know that staff would like to try and do this all at once, but I think we just need to fix what we know is definitively defective, get that done, and come back a second time on some of the other issues. Plus, I'd like to have those issues be brought to the Planning Commission rather than straight to the board to wordsmith. So that's kind of where I am. I'm up for, let's move to close the hearing and adopt the ordinance. But I'll wait to hear from others.
Oh, sorry, I almost interrupted. Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thanks, Chair Bernie. Just a question for Rachel or Amber. There's a discussion regarding the footprint orientation, which in some situations the footprint should be rotated in order to provide a better or less resistance to flood passages. Has that been accounted for in the new language, or is that something that we'd need to look at later also?
That was part of the language that I had on the screen earlier. I was mainly talking about the changes to the first provision in regards to defining footprint, but there was a second provision that we added that would allow someone to reorient the structure on the same footprint. It would allow them to move it if they needed to.
Thank you, Ms. Sorsled. That covers my questions, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other commissioner input? Well, I agree with Commissioners Buck and Bozovich. That equals at least 3. You know, having researched this, nowhere near as much as those commissioners that are directly working with wildfire victims and with people rebuilding. But having researched this, having talked to a number of people, really, truly, I think Mr. Hooker's testimony today kind of says it all. There are people that need us to get on with this so they can get on with their lives. They've been waiting too long as it is. Let's do what's possible, and then we'll make it more perfect later. But my opinion is we just can't hold this up, and that's my input. If there's no further input, the chair would enjoy seeing a motion. Vice Chair Farr.
Chair Bernie, I move ordinance 21-07.
Is there a second? Yes, there is. Thank you, Commissioner. Ordinance number 21-07 has been moved for approval by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Bozievich. Is there discussion to the motion? Commissioner Bozievich.
Just quickly for Andy's sake, can I ask the motion maker to add closing the public hearing to that motion?
I actually think you don't need to, Commissioner.
Good.
I think it's because if you vote and approve the ordinance, all of that is taken care of. That's part of that process.
Great. I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss a step on your part. That was my only concern. Thanks.
Good. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there any other discussion?
If I may, this is Amber Bell again.
Absolutely.
Interject. Thank you, Chair. I just was hoping to clarify, Vice Chair Farr, your question was whether the 20% increased language to the floodway replacement dwelling provision, whether that's been added in the code. And it was, as I understand, not motioned into the ordinance before you at the last reading. So it's not currently in the code, but if I'm understanding correctly, that is a separate board assignment that we will look into in the future. Is that correct?
That is correct. That wasn't my question, however. My question was the orientation, the clockwise orientation of the footprint, and I think that is covered in the amended language.
Thank you. I think Rachel could speak to that and confirm for us here, but I believe that is in the draft language that was not motioned into the ordinance.
That's correct. I'll just confirm that the language that I had on the screen was draft code language, defining the footprint and discussing the orientation of the structures being replaced, and neither of those provisions are in the ordinance before you today.
Thank you. Then, Chair Bernie, my motion remains intact as is, and I will wait patiently for the subsequent discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other discussion? I would like to simply thank staff for even though we are not addressing it in this motion because time is of the essence for those that are trying to rebuild. Nonetheless, thank you very much for providing some initial language and knowing that we will, in fact, make this more perfect without making people wait for us to make this more perfect. With that, all those in favor of ordinance?
Chair Bernie.
Chair,
Yeah.
We'll need a roll call vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. Really? Okay. Apologize.
Everybody knew that but you. Just kidding.
So what else is new? Okay. I'm sorry. Please have a roll call vote. I apologize.
All right. We're ready for the roll call vote. Commissioner Bozievich.
Aye.
Commissioner Farr.
Aye.
Commissioner Buck.
Aye.
Commissioner Trieger.
Trieger votes aye.
Chair Bernie.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
And Chair Bernie, a question if I may.
Forget it.
After what I last said, I don't blame you. And Mr. Rickup, for you, that is inherent. We don't need to add a separate assignment to understand that we are continuing the discussion regarding the further refinements to this code, this section lane code. Thanks.
Ms. Sershlav, Ms. Bell, thank you very, very much. This has been, thank you. That's all. Anything else on this item? I don't believe so. I think we've taken action. Okay.
Commissioners.
This saved us 60 minutes, Chair Bernie. Good job.
Did I hear someone want to speak?
I just said thank you, Commissioners.
Oh, thank you very much. We are now on item 13B, which is a report on Lane County Parks Facility Condition Assessment. And we have with us Brett Henry, Parks Division Manager, Dean Leonard, Faithful Gould. Please, Brett, why don't you and your team begin?
Thank you, Chair Bernie, and good afternoon, fellow commissioners. Brett Henry, Parks Division Manager. So when I began work here at Lane County several years ago, back in the summer of 2018, I knew there was a substantial backlog of deferred maintenance in the park system. What I didn't realize until just recently is just how enormous this backlog actually is, and that we do have some failing infrastructure in our parks that we need to address very quickly. In 2019, the Parks Division asked for and received funding from the county administration to hire a consultant to conduct an assessment of park infrastructure. This assessment was primarily to determine what the price tag is for our total backlog of deferred maintenance. After I sent out the RFPs, I quickly noticed that the price tag was a little higher than I had anticipated for all 68 parks. So I was looking at both the above ground and below ground infrastructure. And so my estimate was a little off. So my estimate was around 200,000. And at that time, I was just looking at above ground infrastructure. When I added the below grade infrastructure, my estimate came in about 1 to 1.5 million. So I was pretty far off. And so then I decided to modify the scope to look at the 4 parks that have the most built infrastructure. And so we looked at Armitage, Baker Bay, Orchard Point, and Richardson Parks. On November of 2020, the Parks Division hired Faithful and Gould to conduct the assessment. Mr. Dean Leonard is here today with Faithful and Gould. He's going to present, the methodology as well as the findings from the facility condition assessment. Unfortunately, the findings indicate that the need for tackling the deferred maintenance, as I mentioned earlier, is much, much greater than originally anticipated, especially if we don't make any targeted capital investments to the deferred maintenance. And so if we're not going to make those investments, we do run the risk in the short term of having some catastrophic failure of critical infrastructure. And Mr. Leonard will talk a little bit more about that. I am, however, I don't want to kind of leave us on a down note. I'm hopeful that in the near future that the Parks Division will find some way to find the funding to start addressing this deteriorating infrastructure. So without further ado, Mr. Dean Leonard, are you ready?
I am, yep. Can everybody hear me okay and see the screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, first of all, thanks very much, chairs and commissioners, for the opportunity to present these results today. It's been quite an exercise to review these parks and pull the results together. But let me start off by just breaking down, some of the things that Brett was talking about there. Why did the county commission this kind of study? It's about being proactive to understand what the county's current and future needs are with the parks. Some of the typical questions that you may have running facilities is, how do we prioritize reduce funding? How can we reduce the growing deferred maintenance list? What assets do we have? What condition are they in? Are they being used to the full potential? Are they compliant? What condition will they be in as a result of any given funding level, and how can we achieve cost savings? And the graphic on the right-hand side really describes the cycle a lot of clients find themselves in. And Lane County is not by all means on their own with this situation. Budget constraints lead to backlog maintenance, as we've discussed. When you have backlog maintenance, you have to extend the life of the equipment and systems. And then your maintenance staff are tied up with high volumes of breakdowns and reactive work orders instead of proactive work and being, looking at preventative maintenance, which the whole purpose is to try and extend the life of the equipment and systems. And so you get caught in this cycle, and then everything's at risk of catastrophic failure. So this program really delves down into some real granular forensic information about the condition of your below grade infrastructure, your water, your irrigation, your sewers, gas, electric, etc. But also your above grade systems and facilities. What's the condition of your parking lots, your pavilions, your cabins, play equipment, trails, visitor centers, picnic areas, restrooms, and your marinas, etc. And so the 4 parks that we assessed were Armitage, Baker Bay, Orchard Point, and Richardson. The project was executed through a 6-phase process where we sat down with Brett's facilities team and planning team and really planned out the details and the approach of this assessment. And then we had teams that captured that on-site data, that walked those parks, that touched and photographed and documented every single piece of equipment. Once we had that data gathering exercise, we could then start to analyze that data, determine where every component, where every system sits within its own respective life cycle. You know, the asphalt parking lots, typically 20, 25 years. Where does that parking lot sit? Is it 15 years into its life cycle? Any other environmental conditions that's accelerating the deterioration? So we're looking at the cause of deterioration, as well as trying to put an accurate cost and remaining useful life on each piece of equipment. And then we pulled all that data and results into a comprehensive written report. And we've got separate reports for each park, as well as an executive summary report, which pulls together the results of each individual report. That went through a quality assurance review, then to provide the county with this strategic plan. So moving onto the results, and at any point, shout out, put your hand up, and I can answer any questions, or if you want to save them to the end, that's perfectly fine as well. So whenever you conduct a facility condition assessment, we typically use an FCI, a facility condition index need, and it's a benchmark just to compare the relative condition from one location to another, so from one park to another, if you like. And it's a simple calculation where we add up all the deficiencies that we've identified at that park and divide that by the current replacement value of all those systems and equipment. And you come up with an index score of 0 to 5% is good, 5 to 10 is poor, is fair, greater than 10 is poor, and very poor is over 60%. So that's the basis of the FCI calculation, and many different industries across the states use this FCI as this benchmark facility condition index. So we look at the results of your 4 parks, and it's not a great number. We're looking at Armitage Bay at 21%, so that's poor. Baker Bay currently in very poor condition, Orchard Point very poor, Richardson very poor. So on average, it's all 4 parks on average is in poor condition. And the 10-year FCI is a calculation of, if investment wasn't made, how would the systems and parks deteriorate, and how would that affect the FCI score? And so you can see the 10-year rating on the right-hand side there. We know it's going to be a combination of the two, because we know investment at some point during this next 10-year period is going to be made. And so it's not going to be the worst case scenario, but it will be a score in between, if you like. So just looking at the numbers a different way, 3 parks are in poor condition and one is in very poor condition.
Can
So
I-
looking at,
Sorry.
sure.
Chair, if I may, just with a really quick question on that previous slide,
Go for it.
previous to that, sorry, when I said previous. So
Yeah.
what account, the leap over 10 years in Orchard Point is significantly greater than the others. Is there a simple answer to what accounts for that? Oh, actually, now that I'm looking closely, Armitage as well. What accounts for the variation in the differential of the 10-year difference?
Yeah, sure. So the score, if you looked at if you remember the previous slide, is just a calculation of the needs that have been identified divided by their current replacement value. So you may have some parks that don't have a greater immediate need, but later on in the study period, this evaluation looks at a 10-year study period. Over the next 10 years, what are the needs that we can identify? And so some of the parks may have a greater need immediately. Some parks may have a greater need at year 6, 7, 8, for example. If that makes sense.
Because of a specific component of infrastructure like pipes, which are going to deteriorate more the longer the time goes on. Right. Okay. Got it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, Mr. Leonard, I want you to know that you invited the interruption, but we're more than happy to listen to the entire presentation.
No, that's perfectly
Okay.
fine. No, it's much better when it's interactive, when you get the slide in front of you and then we can explain it. That's
I agree too, but sometimes it doesn't work that way. Please go ahead,
Yeah.
Paul.
No, that's okay. And so looking at the dollar value, so we've identified this almost 16 million need of deficiencies, items that have either been deferred or will be deferred in this current financial year. $16 million is a lot of money for 4 parks, as you can imagine. And so when you look at the 10-year capital need, we're looking at $18.9 million over 10 years, or the cumulative need of 27, almost 27.2. And we see the capital expenditure forecast as we look at that year by year, and how it does change significantly. Like 2023 is only current need of 15 there. I'll explain these numbers in a little bit more detail on on this slide here. And so you get the breakdown per park of the various needs of Armitage, currently 1.4 million, Baker Bay 2.6, 3.9 Orchard Park, and Richardson as the lion's share of the need, $7.8 million. But you can see there, the year after, if that money is invested, the year after, there's no need of expenditure for 2022. And so it's a direct relation to what systems and equipment we feel needs replacing or needs capital need at that particular year. So let me just explain the capital need totals at the bottom there. You may have a question on, okay, why have we got a total of $18.9 million and a total of $27 million? So the grand total row is a sum of all those capital needs on a year by year basis. And all these needs have been, there's been a 45% soft cost added to these net present value costs. So if some of these deficiencies need a major contractor or a contractor to execute the work, and typically you want to be allowing 45% for contractor profit, overhead, insurance, contingency, etc. So every cost that you see includes that soft cost, but also the year by year calculation from that net present value of 2021 also includes an assumed 4% escalation cost for inflation. Now we don't know what future inflation looks like. It's going to change year by year, and so we've assumed a 4% average per year. So if you're looking at 2022, that 664, that includes a 4% inflation escalation on top of that raw net present value cost. 2023 includes 8% because it's 4% per year. And then you jump to 12% is added to that net present value for 2024. And that's how you get the escalated cost of 18.9. Now, the bottom row is where it gets interesting. So we have the same current value of $15.9 million, but and then you've got your 4% on top of that, but it's not 4% on top of the current year's value. If this row assumes that no investment is made year by year, so you're adding your 16 million plus $664,000, adding those two together, and then applying the 4%, and then 2023. You're adding the total value of that plus an extra $15,000, times that by 8%. And so you can see really the consequences of deferring these deficiencies. Not only are you getting the escalation year by year, but that escalation is also now applied to the previous year's deferred rollover needs costs. So it makes such a difference that if you invested the money year by year, over 10 years, you'd spend 18.9. But if you didn't, that value would go up over the 10-year period to 27.1 million, almost $27.2 million. So it's an important distinction that if investment is not made, that 10-year number would significantly increase.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I said, you can drill down into each individual report and see a much more detailed, granular description as to what we observed, why we applied the cost and the current replacement value, etc. But here's just a summary of some of the large ticket items, anything over $50,000. And you can see that we've got replacing roof membrane, replacing the parking lot asphalt, some below grade piping, a furnace, some more roofing, etc. And we've seen two lists here, some more crack repair, some boat dock treated wood replacement, some more asphalt parking lot, PVC piping, etc. Replace RV hookups. So we've seen some of the larger items of costs within that $18 million. So I've put together a number of funding scenarios just to illustrate how the level of funding impacts the need year by year. And so this is a fully funded scenario where, you know, by magic, you know, the county would come up with $60 million and you would take care of all those needs in the next current financial year. And then you would have a relatively small ongoing need over the next 10 years. We know that that's not realistic, but that's the best case scenario, and your facility condition index would remain in good condition as soon as that investment is made. So looking at a $2 million average funding over the 10-year period, you know, we're seeing the funded, the funding escalate there over the years, and how that impacts it. But we're still left with an almost $10 million worth of unfunded need at the end of the 10 years with a $2 million. Looking at the optimum funding level over the 10-year period, we think it's around 2.5 million. And you can see how, you know, for the first 5, 6 years, we've still got a significant unfunded need. But by the time you get to the year 9 and 10, you know, you've broken the back of these deferred maintenance needs at your 4 parks, and then you get above water, if you like. And again, just looking at the breakdown of needs per park, we've got Richardson at 8.5, Orchard Point at 4.9 almost, Baker Bay at 2.6, and Armitage at 2.8. So looking at the funding based upon need of priority and criticality, priority 1, a system that's requiring immediate need, that's failed, that compromise staff, public safety, needs to be upgraded to comply with current code and accessibility. We've seen the breakdown there. So from a health and safety point of view or code compliance, it's a relatively small number. The majority of your need falls in terms of priority 2, a system or component that is nearing end of useful life that, if not addressed, will cause additional deterioration and added repairs and costs. So you can see the breakdown of the need against the prioritization score. And then what kind of need is it? Is it deferred maintenance? Is it routine maintenance, something minor that your maintenance staff can take care of? Or is it a future capital renewal? And most of your expenditures we discussed falls into that deferred maintenance category. So just in summary again, there's a total immediate need of $18.9 million. However, should funding and investment not be made, and with annual inflation applied to that cumulative need, it will grow to $27.1 million. The 1 park is in poor condition, 3 parks are in very poor condition, and it's a similar index score over the next 10 years. Both remain in poor and very poor condition. Any questions?
I'm sure there are. We will start with Commissioner Farr.
Thanks, Chair Bernie. You know, I frequent 3 of those parks, and you know, Lane County's parks are actually jewels, and the fact that we're only talking about 4 is an indicator of how much deferred and capital maintenance we have in front of us. At first, a bit of formality here, Dean. You see a Sheffield United jersey hanging behind me. I'd guess you're probably a little bit farther north in Yorkshire, maybe Leeds-ish or Bradford.
Oh, wow, you've got your accent very well. Leeds United for sure.
Oh, well, you know, you might have opposed on that one.
Here we go.
Born and raised in Leeds.
I'm from Oregon, but I'm a Yorkshireman at heart. So.
Excellent, excellent.
Well, Leeds is looking good in Premiership again. Good job.
No, we need some more wins under our belt for sure.
As do the Blades in Championship, but that's let's talk over a cup of ginger beer sometime.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
My business questions related to all of these parks are on Corps of Engineer waterways. One of them's on Mackenzie River, the other on lakes. And it would be interesting to know if the Corps of Engineers has some kind of funding or some kind of innovative way to help us conduct some of these capital and deferred maintenance projects. That's kind of a overhanging question, Brett, that I don't know how we even go about asking that question. But the Corps of Engineers owns the water. So
yeah, so currently we have a lease agreement with not Armitage, but the other 3 parks, right? And so, yeah, I've spoken with the Corps, you know, about this facility condition assessment, and they are willing to take a look at it. However, you look at how the lease, you look at the lease language, and it doesn't seem very favorable. I think I'd probably need someone like Jim Chaney, somebody county council, to see kind of what our responsibility is and what the Corps' responsibility is. So, you know, we've taken on these parks and we're maintaining them. So that's a lot of that's on us. We've had these parks for really since early 70s. So some of the parks. So we've had them for a while, and a lot of that's on us. but yeah, there will be some discussions about some of that more critical infrastructure, especially when we're talking about Richardson and Orchard Point. We're getting really close to really failure of the water and sewer system there. And so we got to address that right away.
And that affects the Corps of Engineers' quality of water. So that's a future discussion, but I'm glad you're already thinking about that. Second is when we're looking at the Orchard Point and Richardson parks, that would include Zumwalt and Perkins, which aren't on this list, but those parks have wonderful causeways of asphalt that are sloped down into the water. And I'm presuming we're just completely abandoning those, that there's no maintenance that's going to be done on those. We'll just wait for them to wash away as they have at the North Shore of Orchard Point. Is that the correct assumption?
Yeah, it's kind of a push and pull that's going on right now. Actually, we're losing more water out of the reservoirs as well. So the Corps of Engineers, they draw water out of the reservoirs to put into the Willamette River Basin. So yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back and forth. Over a long period of time, yeah, you're going to see some deterioration.
As you see on the point of Perkins Peninsula, it's almost all gone. The dangerous part about that, and we all know this if you visit there, is that it does expose a great deal of rebar, which is, if you fall against that, I mean, there's potential of really serious injury. But that's, once again, a matter for further discussion. Dean, I want to thank you for this presentation. If anybody who frequents our parks know that we have wonderful parks, and they also know that we need to invest in them. Finding a way to do that is something that I'm very interested in this Board of Commissioners helping seek. So I'll wait for other commissioners to talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there other commissioners that would like to speak? Yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Dean and Brett, for the report. When I first became a commissioner 10 years ago or so, we had an estimate at that time for the entire park system of about a $16 million deferred maintenance. So if you take that 16 and inflate it for the last 10 years, the fact that just 4 parks are currently at 16 is just kind of, telling you how big of a hurdle we're facing for the entire park system. I will note that the Corps is cash poor. It has to beg Congress for money just to maintain their dams. And in fact, they're one of the things I've been trying to lobby for several years now. In fact, almost the entire time I've been a commissioner, is the water control curves that the Corps runs the dams by was designed in the late 60s and was based on hydrologic data from the previous 50 or so years, which includes some pretty wet decades. And they haven't updated those water control curves since then. And it's one of the reasons why they have such a hard time keeping Fern Ridge Reservoir full. It needs to be redone, and it's not even a big hunk of money to do that. But trying to get the Corps to do it, they have to have specific money allocated to the Willamette River project for that purpose. They can't take it from any other bucket. They have these buckets that are very specific. So trying to ask the Corps to help fund this, we're looking in the wrong place, just so folks are aware. They're not going to be a source of funding. What used to fund a lot of this was our forest receipts from our federal lands. That's how we built this magnificent park system that we do have, how we paved roads like Wolf Creek Road that would never be paved in most counties. It was with those timber receipts. But we don't have those now, although, hopefully we can work on some of those issues, and particularly the Wyden Crapo proposal to basically put that into a trust. So we might continue to get some of that, but we definitely have a problem. One of the things I didn't hear in this so much, I'm an engineer by background, just so you know, Dean, and I did a lot of these sort of studies for utilities. Is there in their criticality index, one of the things they have in there is how much revenue and customers will be affected if that particular part of the system fails.
Mm.
So of course, something at the front end of the water system, like a treatment plant, affects everybody. So a failure there is really critical and needs to be addressed first. One of the things that isn't filtered into this maybe is how many people actually utilize Armitage or Richardson, how much money do they generate in revenue for the county? And you know, maybe as we look at that $2.5 million a year, we need to have a little bit more of a filter on that to try and deal with how we can make sure we're having the most impact in maintaining our parks for the greatest number of people and the greatest amount of ongoing operational revenue for the park system. So something that keeps the Armitage and Richardson RV parks running is a little bit more important maybe than some of the other, you know, Orchard Point doesn't necessarily generate, you know, a strong amount of revenue compared to those two parts. So one filter I might add onto that for Brett to think about, you know, because I don't know if we're going to come up with 16 million before the end of the fiscal year unless we're pulling ARPA funds in, which, by the way, this would be a great use. One-time use of the funds, prevent future cost.
Mm.
So
yeah, and I've requested it through ARPA, and I think you make a really good point there, Jay. When you look at Richardson, especially, you know, it's our number 2 revenue-producing park behind HBRA. And HBRA is just primarily from the parking fees. You know, we have 500,000 visitors there a year, right? And so when we're looking at that water and sewer infrastructure, which is really close to failure, if we lose that camping revenue, that's going to be serious for us. As we know, during the summer of 2020, you know, when the governor, you know, had to shut down for campgrounds for 2 months there, that was pretty devastating for our revenue stream at that point. About 45% of our revenue is through camping, 30% directly, and then another 15% for the RV registration fees. So that's almost half of our revenue.
Commissioner Bozovich, were you through?
yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for this great presentation, Mr. Leonard and Mr. Henry. Really appreciate it. And it's a great teeing us up for what I anticipate. I believe we're going to be hearing soon from the task force, Parks Funding Task Force. And it's if nothing else, this presentation is a perfect exemplification of that saying, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. And of course, ideally and eventually, we'd like to get a place where, you know, we're not just figuring out how to fund deferred maintenance, but get out in front and keep our maintenance on schedule so that we're not deferring any, because, right, deferred maintenance is more expensive. And it also puts us in this vicious cycle, right, where the condition of the parks reflects on people's experience of the park, which reflects on park usage, which reflects on the revenue we generate through things like camping fees and so on. So all those things are in the stew in my mind as I think about and as I read through the recommendations from the funding task force and the parks plan. And I do want to tag on to what Commissioner Bozovich just mentioned, because I think it's important, although I would give a slight word change, and it's not just semantic, is I completely agree. It's a really important filter. And I think the Parks Funding Task Force applied that filter, is what are the ancillary economic benefits to certain parks over others, for exactly those reasons that he mentioned. If more people come and they're staying longer, like at a campground, how that generates economic activity for the neighboring stores and other businesses as opposed to day use areas. The slight change I would make is I don't know that I would call that more important. It's just important in a different way, or it's important information to consider. But I think all of our parks are important, and I think everyone who uses them would be able to make a very compelling case for why that particular park and what it offers is important. So rather than putting us in a position of pitting one park's importance over another, but I fully appreciate and agree that considering the fuller picture of the impact of what one park over another generates for overall economic activity in the community is a really important consideration. And I believe we'll be hearing more about that very filter and that very impact from the task force. So thank you again for this presentation. Great. And the other thing I would say, as Commissioner Farr mentioned at the beginning, is this is only 4 of our 69 parks, right? So I don't know if there are plans or resource to do similar assessments moving forward on sort of the next cut and which parks those will be and how many, but I think this is exactly the kind of thoughtful analysis that we need to help us think through our long range plans for these really incredible investments and assets that we hold as a county and how we're going to protect them moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we have 13 parks that we've identified for a second tier assessment. And so actually when I sent out the original quotes, I had them break them down by park. So we know what that's going to roughly be. And so we're just kind of looking at the next tier of parks that has, you know, the infrastructure. But I think that, yeah, it's not like one park is more important than the other. I tend to look at it as services that we provide the public. And so, you know, activities, recreation activities, you know, not every service or activity has to make money. But I think that, you know, when I was hired, I thought, well, we need a business plan. We need to take a look at, you know, our marinas, our campgrounds, our day use areas, you know, our trails, everything, and see kind of what the financial, you know, benefit is of each park. But we got to still keep in mind that there are some parks that don't make us much money, but they have a recreation value to them. Some natural areas, you know, HBRA, Howard Beaver Recreation Area, Blue Mountain. So there are quite a few of those as well. So just kind of balancing all that's really important for the public.
Commissioner Trieger, were you through?
Yeah, I really appreciate that they don't all have to make money. And I think, for example, that environmental protection and conservation element of some of those less developed areas is a great example of that. And our responsibility as stewards of that land is, it's a really great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Being born and raised here, I grew up on Orchard Point in Richardson. That's where everybody did everything. We did all our birthday parties there. All the kids did their track trials there. And it was different. I mean, it was a different place at that time. It was well maintained back then. And it's so sad to see them fall so far over the years. And Armitage and Baker, you know, those now are in my district, right? So what this shows me is that this is probably a larger sampling from a dollar amount, but it is a sampling of our parks. And we're talking about big money here. And a lot of people don't think about how our parks are financed or maintained unless they do necessarily, you know, go in and rent some places for their RV. But for the most part, I don't think people realize the challenge it is to fund our park system. And this begs a question of how are we going to pay for all of this? What are our options? I'm guessing that will be in a subsequent work session about this. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, a week from today.
Okay. This is the warm up.
Yeah, this is a sobering news. But you know, and so it's not all deferred maintenance. Obviously, we talk about just maintaining what we have, you know, year to year. So it's operations, right? So we need staffing, you know, we need the materials and services and so forth to continue to maintain and, you know, keep up. But yeah, it's, you know, I knew when I started this job that there was a tremendous challenge. I knew we had a deferred maintenance backlog. You know, as mentioned, 16 million was the previous estimate. But just if you go out there, I think it's very apparent. You know, you see the parking lots, they have cracks in them, grass growing through. But not even that, just like below the surface. And so when we started just scoping below the surface and just seeing all the piping that was in poor shape, and it's, yeah, it's very sobering. But I think that we have a potential now to start investing, and we're not going to tackle it all at once, but we're going to start putting some significant investment into it. Because, really we owe the citizens, not just the memories, but it's, we don't want to close parks. And we don't want to get to that point. And, before long, we're going to get to that point. I think just addressing it now and realizing, like Dean was saying, the ideal investment's about $2.5 million a year. And so that needs to be our goal, is $2.5 million a year until we address it within a 10-year period. And so that's why we're doing this.
Commissioner Buck, I apologize. I think I interrupted you. Did you have oh, okay.
Just to add to Brett's comments there, now we know what the size of the issues are. There's opportunities to look at your infrastructure and maybe look at some opportunities to re-engineer. If we know that we've got 50, 60-year-old water and sewer systems that's coming to end of useful life, and that's going to cost millions of dollars to replace, is there an opportunity to re-engineer that particular park and put in a septic and leach field to significantly reduce the costs of providing those services to that park? So there are options to look at a wider study, look at cost savings to meet this. But by far, these 4 parks have got the lion's share of the below grade and infrastructure across your 60 parks, and we don't anticipate the same level of costs across all your park systems. We did a very rough parametric model, if you like, where we compared park by park what systems were installed in each particular park system, and compared that with the average cost at all these 4 parks, and we came up with a number that circa $29-30 million. So it's not going to be $27 million across your 60 parks. We're not going to be using that as your average baseline across 60 parks. We think that there's significantly reduced needs at other parks across the county.
Well, Mr. Leonard, I was waiting to talk, and then you took the wind out of my sails. So I will just, as it relates to that, I want to say there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat.
Yeah.
Especially in developing cost estimates to solve problems, especially this large. And I think that's layman terms for what you just shared with us. And that's good for us to realize as we develop a strategy moving forward. I have kind of 2 different sets of comments. One set is, I think that what we are seeing here is a general disinvestment in government and public services. And that's touching everyone and everything, and it's touching our parks. I think our parks also are reflective of our commitment to our environment, because rivers run through them, watersheds run through them, etc. So I'm looking forward, frankly, to a more, I'm understanding this is 4 parks, probably the 4 more expensive as you look at infrastructure. I'm looking forward to more of the granular information, Mr. Henry, from, that look at who visits, who pays, what they pay, what the negatives are, right? Negative dollar-wise, et cetera, as we're looking at, and I'm very much looking forward to a strategic solution, right? Maybe some ARPA funds now, but we all, that's one set of points I would like to make. I'd like to make another set of points. Mr. Leonard, would you say that one of the things that you're sharing with us is it's easier to maintain healthy parks than to fix broken ones?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you're always behind the 8 ball, and always paying escalated pricing when something is deferred, for sure.
Thank you, sir. I took that from a Frederick Douglass quote, and the Frederick Douglass quote is, "It's healthy. It's cheaper to raise healthy children than to fix broken adults." And right, and that quote is applicable here. And it's hard for me as a county commissioner, hearing from everyone on all these issues, and another thing you talked about was significant unfunded need, and over 9 years you've broken the back of the parks. And I couldn't help but apply that to people, and apply that to human service infrastructure, and apply that to housing, and apply that to medical and healthcare, and apply that to so many things, which frankly we are contending with at the lowest possible level, which is the reality of where the rubber hits the road. And it's both enlightening and sad to hear your very good, solid, comprehensive analysis of the Lane County Park System. But it's within that context that I hear it.
Yeah.
I have no questions because I know we'll get into more nitty gritty, Mr. Henry, next week. Do any other commissioners have any other statements or questions? Commissioner Bozovich.
I'm going to play Commissioner Wet Blanket for a second here. And I'm just going to remind the board that our capital plan is also coming to us soon. And just in the planned projects that they've done enough work to have solid estimates, the 5-year facilities capital plan is $25.7 million. That doesn't include what's currently under design and not included in the capital plan, which are tens of millions on beyond that. I mean, just the remodel of our adult corrections facility is estimated at 10 million. So one of the things that, and one of the reasons why we're sitting on this problem with parks is, as the federal government cast us away in ending SRS, the taper down and everything else they did, and how they haven't held up their end of the bargain when it comes to the federal lands they own in this county, we've had to make tough decisions about prioritizing where we spend our money. And you start making choices between parks and public safety. And it's parks and people's direct health provision. It's not an easy thing. And I just want to say, as we have that discussion, Brett, about how we fund this, I don't want the board to forget this is not the only program that has massive deferred maintenance. We all know about the county courthouse. We just finished touring the jail as a board. We're aware that we're building a new parole and probation office because we basically didn't have one. We just have to put all this into perspective and understand that it's very difficult right now. We're in that cycle. The first slide one of the first slides Mr. Leonard put up there, extremely restricted resources, which leads to this long-term problem. And I don't know how easily we're going to get out of it, but I just want to, prepare you, Brett, that you're in competition with a lot of other programs that have high deferred maintenance and capital needs. And we'll just have to try and figure this whole thing out. The fortunate thing about parks, though, is they're dang popular with the voters. Jails aren't.
Mr. Henry, Mr. Leonard, anything else as it relates to this item in your presentation?
Yeah, I mean, it just highlights, doesn't it, when you look across your county, this is just one agency of the county. And when you apply a study like this across all agencies, then you get the full vision of what your county needs are. And then you can start prioritizing, across those different agencies and different needs on a county-wide basis. But this is just parks and recs.
Yeah, I think I'll just end on the fact that we're just seeing more visitors at the parks than ever before, right? Since the pandemic And so people, use our parks for, to relieve, mental stress and get physical conditioning. So we're seeing more and more people out there than ever before, which means more wear and tear, more maintenance, etc. So we have to also figure that into the equation. Thanks, Commissioner Bosevich. Obviously, we need to keep it all in perspective. It's not just about parks, and I understand that. But we do have a story to tell, and this is part one of our story.
And on a bright note for you, Mr. Leonard, up the peacocks.
Absolutely.
Mr. Brett, Dean, if I may, thank you very much. And my statements about context, right, and disinvestment in other areas, I don't think take anything away from our need to focus on this and help carve out a solution with you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Very much. I don't know, but it's just unpleasant. Okay, we are on item 13C now, a discussion in the matter of extending wastewater services for the Goshen industrial area and the Short Mountain landfill. We have Dan Hurley, Alex Kyler, and Austin Ramirez with us. Welcome all, and Dan, I'm assuming you're going to lead this off.
Yes, thank you, Chair Bernie. Good afternoon, Commissioners. And let me get my screen showing here. All right, are you able to see that?
Not yet.
Okay, let's try that again.
Yes.
You see some slides?
Well, we only see one.
I can't see them, that's a problem. Okay, I've done this before. All right, well, let's see what we can do. Okay, how about that? Yes.
At the top of your menu item, there's a thing that says audience view. If you click that, you'll see what the audience is seeing.
Okay. I think we're good right now. Is everybody good? I'm going to assume so. Please
We're
stop.
shaking our heads yes.
Okay, all right. I can't see you, but I'll figure this out later. Let's see. Okay, let me just keep going. So sorry for that. I'll get this figured out eventually. So here to talk with you about two projects that have been discussed for many years, actually. Extending wastewater services to Goshen and constructing a leachate conveyance pipeline. Leachate is the wastewater that comes from the landfill. And these could be considered as a conjoined project, or they could be considered two different projects. And we'll talk more about that as we get into the presentation. These projects go back many years. The leachate pipeline project was a discussion with the board almost 25 years ago. The Goshen wastewater project goes back to about 2011, when the board directed Land Management Division to look at ways of increasing development in the unincorporated community of Goshen. And it was adopted by the board as a strategic plan goal to develop jobs in industrial areas and high-paying jobs for that. So this was in the wake of the Great Recession, and for a little context there. We're bringing this back to you because there's a potential for funding this project either through American Rescue Plan dollars or potentially federal infrastructure dollars, assuming that gets through Congress. We had put this project on the back burner after we saw the cost of the project and after we encountered a number of obstacles, particularly with the Metro Plan, and we'll get back to that. I'm joined today by Austin Ramirez, our County Economic Development Manager, and we also have Matt Stouter on the line. Matt is the General Manager of MWMC, the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission. And to bring this back up to speed for you, bringing you back up to speed on this, since it's been a couple of years, it was back in 2019, I believe, that we last discussed these topics with the board. Austin's going to refresh a few of the slides from our last presentation to give some background. So Austin.
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon, Chair Bernie and Commissioners. Appreciate the time. Like we've talked about this piece when we've come to the board before, and I like to just provide it as context and a reminder of why Goshen matters, not just to the county, but also really to the entire state. In terms of economic opportunity and potential, there is no other site like Goshen in the state at this point. And what I mean by that is it's 300 acres of contiguous industrial and employment land. It's got major access to all the major highways and intermodal rail stations. BPA power is incredibly close. It has water accessibility. Fiber at this point runs near it and through it. It's got proximity to the largest labor market in the region and all the assets that are in our county seat. It does have two significant barriers, though. One is really the lack of sewer infrastructure that prevents any serious development opportunity, and then also some regulatory barriers we'll talk about later. One thing that's also important to know, and we've discussed this before with commissioners, is that Goshen is made up of a collection of private property owners, which is a layer of complexity there. That's not unusual for economic development opportunities to obviously have land be privately owned. But all that being said, I think there's huge opportunity to make Goshen an example for the rest of the state, to leverage what it has, to turn it into something that is maximized and creates living wage, fully benefited jobs, advanced manufacturing, green jobs. There's just a lot of options for a site like Goshen if we can get it to that point, which is historically why we've put so much energy and time into this project. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so really our efforts with Goshen started in 2012 with what was called then the RICIA program, which is a regionally significant industrial area, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the next slide. And then the GREAT plan, which is what we called the Goshen Regional Employment and Transition Plan, which was really designed to further explore it as an opportunity and overcome some of the regulatory barriers, specifically to obtain a Goal 14 exception. In 2015, we had a wastewater feasibility study. In 17, we extended that to look at the financial and system administration of a wastewater system. And then in 2019, we brought it forward up to a project definition report that is currently in a draft form. And then that's where we are today. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then the RICIA, which I mentioned earlier, regionally significant industrial area, that was a program that the state had, which is really to preserve its best industrial and employment lands. In terms of benefits, it's additional state support for job creation within that area, zoning protection from conflicting development, infrastructure, transportation funding would be prioritized in certain programs, and then an expedited local land use permit review. There is a time statute associated with that program. So 50% of the developable land within that area had not been developed within 10 years since the designation. That designation would be removed unless the majority of landowners in that area request that it remain designated. In September 2019, before we went back to the board for an update, we actually learned that the RICIA had been discontinued. But the state did encourage us to pursue sort of the latest and greatest version of that program, which was the RICIS, or Regionally Significant Industrial Site. In terms of how that provides more value or how that's better, it provides reimbursement to public agencies for a variety of land preparation activity, up to $10 million a year. So if that is something we pursued, it would be a significant resource to get Goshen truly shovel ready. And then Dan, I'll pass it back to you.
All right, and now that I can see Alex Kyler, our Intergovernmental Relations Manager, is also on. Alex, did you have anything to add at this point? We can come back to you.
Yeah, I don't think so, other than that, you know, that 2011 effort was really initiated out of a bill that Senator Beyer initiated. It was Senate Bill 766. And really, it more than protected you know, industrial areas, it was really looking to evolve them, because as Austin indicated, we were just coming out of the recession, and Senator Beyer was aware of how challenging it was to develop industrial lands, and so particularly the land use streamlining that existed, if you could get that in that RSIA was important. And we were, I think we were the second county to get awarded that designation. So we worked, we worked really hard to ensure that we would see Goshen be designated. And, unfortunately, this project has just taken much longer than I think any of us ever anticipated it would.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Alex. So in 2015, we engaged with, probably before that, engaged with a consulting firm, Kennedy Jenks, to do a feasibility study for Goshen. And they developed a conceptual plan for the infrastructure, which would include a force main along Highway 99, multiple pump stations serving 3 different basins within Goshen, gravity sanitary sewers running alongside the force main and laterally out to these basins, and then connecting into an existing 18-inch sewer in Springfield that then connects to the MWMC regional wastewater treatment system. This service area in Goshen would service over 400 acres. About 3/4 of that would be either general or light industrial. Following that feasibility study, we started exploring, well, if wastewater was connected to Goshen, then potentially we could extend that out further to be able to connect Shorten Mountain. And this has been a dream for the landfill for probably more than 25 years. And it was attempted with the board and the community at one point in time. But there was a significant backlash in the late 90s around the concept that if sewers were extended outside the UGB, then it could enable sprawl, even though we were only looking at, I think, a 4-inch pipe running to the landfill at that time. So part of bringing this project back to you for discussion again is to see if we could avert that if we decided to move down this path. So the force main to the landfill for that leachate would pick up an additional 76,000 gallons per day. There would be that additional force main running from Goshen to the landfill, an additional pump station. And in total, that force main line would be about 6.25 miles. We continue to work with Kennedy Jenks, and they completed a project definition report, a more detailed analysis following our last conversation with you. And here are the estimated costs from that report that we kept in draft form. We hadn't brought it back to you. It is in your packet. And you can see there the total construction costs for this would be a little over $14 million. Oh, there's an error there at 14 to $15 million. And total project costs would be 24 to 25 million when you add in the connection costs to MWMC and to the city of Springfield. Presumably, if this moved forward, those costs would be recouped over time by property owners as they connect to the system and through usage charges. But when we completed this, there was no idea where we would get the funding from. And we also encountered some issues with the MWMC IGA as we explored that further. So we did present to MWMC and they were generally supportive. Of course, we would need to work out lots of details about pre-treatment and connection costs, but they were open to exploring the idea. But as we dug into the IGA, the intergovernmental agreement, we found that an amendment would need to be in conformity with the Metro Plan. And the Metro Plan is the biggest concern to me and the Pandora's box that this could open if we try to amend the Metro Plan. There are 2 specific policies that are of concern. That policy number 4 there, Lane County shall discourage urban development in urbanizable and rural areas and encourage compact development of outlying communities. One could argue that industrial development is different than urban development, so that this policy may not apply, and that would need some more analysis. But the second policy there, policy number 26, explicitly prohibits extending wastewater out of the UGB. So that would need to be amended. Amending the Metro Plan is a major undertaking. It would require the city of Springfield, the city of Eugene, and Lane County to adopt essentially similar amendments that allow for the extension of wastewater outside the UGB, and concerns that there could be a big pushback against that from people that think that this could lead to sprawl or that the communities would fear losing industrial businesses to Goshen. I'd like to shift gears and talk now about the leachate part of it. Again, I mentioned that this was an effort in the late 90s. It was intended that leachate hauling, so we haul the leachate. The leachate is what collects at the bottom of the lined landfill. It then goes to a storage lagoon and an upright storage tank. And then it's hauled by truck. Sometimes that's 24-hour operations during really wet weather, but it's over 20 million gallons generally a year. And it was intended that this was going to be a short-term project. As they were exploring the pipeline, and then when there was pushback from the pipeline, there was a significant effort to build on-site treatment, which never fully materialized. But we've continued in this mode for 23 years and have hauled now over 500 million gallons of leachate, totaling over 66,000 loads. That is in total over 1 million trucked miles. Annual emissions are over 600 metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent. And actually, they would be lower than that now that we're running renewable diesel. This was an action building a pipeline that was identified in our internal climate action plan, but it's actually the worst bang for the buck given the expense of this project. However, there are a lot of operational reasons why we would love to have a pipeline to keep these tankers off the road in case there was an accident and we wouldn't want leachate spilling out. It can be somewhat dangerous driving this 24 hours a day during wet weather. It's a major operational undertaking, and we have limited storage at the landfill. You might be wondering, how are we able to get that leachate to the wastewater system now in the context of the MWMC IGA? And there are a couple of things in there. One is that the IGA was amended actually fairly recently to allow hauled waste into the system. And then the second one is that the IGA allows for continued service to existing users, even if outside of the city limits. So that second provision in particular would allow us to move the leachate part of this project forward without requiring a Metro Plan amendment. So knowing these major obstacles and the expense, I asked Kennedy Jinks if they could explore a couple alternatives that would allow just the leachate part to move forward. And so they looked at this a couple different ways. The first one, alternative one there, would be to put in the necessary infrastructure to convey the leachate, but to put in the piping, the underground infrastructure that could support Goshen wastewater in the future. So we would downsize the number of pump stations and sizing on those. And so that brings that cost down from what was 14 million earlier to about 8.7 million. So basically, putting the pipes in the ground while the trench is excavated, which is a major part of this construction cost. They also looked at it as this alternative two, which would be just the piping sized for leachate conveyance. And so that would be a 6-inch force main running the length of that project. Of course, if we went forward on alternative two and then later decided we wanted to move forward with the Goshen wastewater project, we would have to reopen all that trenching and a considerable cost, basically, starting over from there. So that is the big concern and why we're bringing this forward to you at this time. Specifically, would love direction from the board to get your feedback on, is this still a priority for the board? The Goshen water in particular, Goshen wastewater in particular. It has dropped off the board's strategic plan. There's been turnover with the board from when this was initially conceived. And so specifically wanting to know if staff should pursue infrastructure funding for wastewater to Goshen. Is the board interested in pursuing a Metro Plan amendment? Should we go through the process to redesignate this under the new designation from the state for a regionally significant industrial site? And is the board interested in pursuing any sort of development tools in Goshen to try to enable specific types of development there? Lane County doesn't currently own any of the properties in Goshen. So that's the first question. And then the second one.
That was a bunch of questions.
That's a bunch of questions, sorry. But the second one, if it's not a priority for the board, should the leachate pipeline be pursued independently? And if so, of those two different alternatives that I just talked through. Okay, so that's a lot of material, a lot of questions. I'll stop there. Chair Bernie, if you have questions or anyone from the board.
Thank you very much. Boy, nothing like a easy day here. I see a couple of commissioners' hands up. I see Commissioner Buck's hands up first.
Thank you, Chair. Currently, this is in my district, and so it's really important to me to be able to say something. I still think it's a priority. I think it's a significant opportunity. Even a couple of years ago, we wouldn't have known that we were so close to a transportation infrastructure bill at the size that it is at Congress, hopefully, which gets passed, and that different kinds of opportunities would come our way. I'm in favor of moving forward with this. I'm also in favor of providing the opportunity for the Goshen area to be able to hook up. I think it would be short-sighted of us not to be able to provide that particular opportunity given its unique location and unique nature in the state of Oregon and its potential for just what I see as like green energy potential for development in that particular location where we just don't have the space, the size, or the other opportunities to the I-5 corridor that Goshen provides. I would urge my other commissioners to consider all of those things when we give direction here today. But I wanted to at least mention that in the beginning of the conversation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Vice Chair Farr also had his hand up.
Thanks, Chair Bernie. I'm pretty glad that Commissioner Buck had her hands up first, because I would agree with much of what she stated. Back when I first started looking at this in 2012, it seemed like a natural area for expansion because it's previously disturbed land. Plenty of job opportunity there, and at the time, what seemed like a relatively low infrastructure cost to get it prepared for industrial development. So I have nothing much to add. I'm in favor of moving forward with it. I think the leachate line, Dan, how many gallons a day did you say we're shipping, or how many gallons a year was it?
Gallons a year, it's over 20 million gallons.
20 million gallons a year per year, every year on those trucks, which are nice trucks. There's no question about it. But what if one overturned on I-5? It would only take one of those many trucks. So I think moving as rapidly as we can to get things in place. It was in the 1990s that I believe it was the city of Eugene that put the brakes on the project to begin with. But it would have cost, well, I'm not even going to bet. It would have cost a lot less to implement the leachate line at that point in time. So I'm in forward of moving ahead, Mr. Hurley. For me, you asked two questions, and I have them written down here. Your questions are: one is Goshen still a priority for the board? I think you've heard yes on that. And should a leachate pipeline be pursued independently? No, it should all be pursued at the same time. So independently is only if we do not work on the future infrastructure for Goshen.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. So I was going back and rereading the alternative options real quick, and definitely support option one. I still support Goshen as a priority. We lost the opportunity under the Obama administration's stimulus plans to site a significant solar firm in Lane County because we didn't have industrially zoned property large enough. We've got a lot of industrial zone land in Lane County, but it's in like 5 acre or less increments, nothing of decent size. And this would bring us in some very large industrial parcels and allow us that opportunity to compete for some of these firms. And it would be an amazing opportunity. In addition, it opens up really the ability for LTD to extend MX down to the LCC basin, because it would add something at the terminus that would have more than just school year usage. MX can't survive just on a school usage. So that's a secondary item. But so there's so many different benefits to this. And one of the reasons why it was such a high priority for the board and should remain so. And I want to note that ODOT is going to need to pursue a type 3 amendment to the Metro Plan for their 126 safety improvements on the west side of Eugene relative to amending the wetlands portion of the Metro Plan. So it might not be a bad idea if Lane County and ODOT might talk a little bit, see if they might be able to run those processes in parallel. And let's do this once. But just so I do know that that's in the offing as I sit on the 126 stakeholders committee. That's one of the issues they're looking at, is the need to amend the Metro Plan. So I'm fully supportive of the project, still a priority for me. I would keep going with trying to support the entire wastewater system for Goshen, not just the leachate for the landfill. And when it gets to that one portion of the Metro Plan that talks about water and sewer outside of the UGB, we already have that service. And I can give you examples just from my experience at eWeb, where we serve water outside the UGB in multiple areas because we annexed or took over old water districts that already had service lying outside, but it's now eWeb customers. It's wholly owned utility by the city of Eugene, serves outside UGB. So there's already places we do that, and I think we can make a good argument for this being a really good reason to have an exception for that one goal.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other commissioner want to weigh in on this? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just say, just listening to the conversation, the presentation, reading through the materials, being new to the topic, but not new to the community, and hearing some of the conversations, I'm supportive as well. It really is a unique, uniquely situated and unique size of property. And as for the pipeline, I mean, obviously we're not making any decisions today. And so I would just say, let's just do the next thing that keeps as many options open to us as possible until, in the flow chart of things. If there's a yes, and then there's multiple next steps, we just take that one until we get it down to the one that makes the most sense. What Commissioner Rosevich just mentioned is of interest to me. The idea that perhaps if there needs to be an exception made, it's made very specifically and explicitly for this purpose. If there is concern about making an exception that just feels too broadly open, wide open to others in the community. But I'm not even sure we're there yet. We're at a different place and time, and community is having different conversations around all of these issues. And so I'm fully in support of keeping the conversation open and going and maintaining this as a priority.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, heck, even if I was against the whole damn thing, you already got 4 votes to move forward. But I would just like to say one yes and yes to the 2 questions. And I would like commissioners and the public, imagine the contribution to mitigating climate change by taking those trucks off the road. Imagine, and say much less safety. Imagine for a moment that maybe we had a company in Lane County, and forgive me, I'm not just talking about my district. I think we all are commissioners for the entire county, right? Imagine if we had in our county a company that was one of the world's largest manufacturers of recycling, anaerobic digesters, systems attendant to landfills that could reuse mass quantities more of what's now going into the landfill and creating consumer products out of it and tons of jobs. Gee, imagine that. Imagine having 300 acres, creating not only renewable energy facilities, but a literal net zero industrial park because it would be feeding itself the energy. Imagine, gee, if maybe we were doing that, how many state and federal resources we could bring in and how many hundreds upon hundreds of good jobs we could create. So that's why my input, for what it's worth, Mr. Hurley, is if this has been a priority for 10 years, does that mean if we're all saying it's a priority in 10 more years, we won't have done anything? That's a rhetorical question, but you understand what I'm saying. I think we need to move forward. I think we need to do things. I need people, our constituents and people here need to see shovels in the ground. That I think, based on my personal private experience, once you start, action incurs action, and doing things attracts resources. So you could not have a more enthusiastic yes from me, because I'm just imagining. Do any other commissioners want to make any statements, or Mr. Hurley, Mr. Ramirez, or Mr. Kyler? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
You may say he's a dreamer, but he's not the only one.
Don't tell me the Rolling Stones. No, I'm just kidding. Are there any other comments? Mr. Hurley, do you have a sense of direction here?
I do. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Board, for your support all around. We'll start taking those next steps to engage with MWMC. Again, Matt Stouter's on the line. He's heard the conversation today, and we'll start engaging there. We'll also start looking at a Metro Plan amendment and some of those other next steps. So we'll be talking about this again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you, commissioners. It is now, I know the day's just flown by. I'm so tired, I'm sorry. We're now on item 14, commissioner business. Do any commissioners have any announcements? I have an announcement. I would like to, well, two things. One, I want to beg the question. We last year had scheduled evening board meetings once a month. One of the things I was really looking forward to as chair this year was getting back in person and actually having what I know Commissioner then Chair Buck wanted to do, which was having meetings in different parts of the county. That's not been available to us. Do any board members think that maybe it would be good to have one evening meeting for public comment for those that work or for other reasons can't make our regular sessions before the year's out? I just need to pose that as a question to my fellow commissioners. Commissioner Buck?
Yeah, I'm certainly available. The unfortunate part is in this last year, we just haven't had very much participation. So if we do want to do that, we'd have to figure out a way to really get that out to the public so that we could garner some participation.
Anyone else have any strong feelings here? I'm all for as much engagement as possible, but Commissioner is right that the last few times there weren't many people that opted for the opportunity. Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thanks, Chair Burney. And you and I spoke ever so briefly earlier today about it during agenda setting. And I think that it needs to be something that we keep a keen eye on. I think the timing is not right for it. My experience is that each time we have a participation, that a session that is not at Harris Hall, that is someplace a little bit close to where people who otherwise may not come to Harris Hall can attend. They've been very well attended, whether it be at Willamette Lane or we've had them in Cottage Grove in the past. Certainly in Oak Ridge, we've had great attendance. Sometimes it's for ad hoc purposes, but generally speaking, people are wanting to see us in their, in remote locations.
Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate you bringing this up. I think a couple of things. I think everybody's a little burnt out by the evening at staring at screens and doing virtual things. So that may be part of why, even when we tried to continue it in this virtual environment, we didn't get great response from the public. I also think it's not only about Harris Hall geographically being a place that people feel is accessible, but just it can be for folks who are not used to engaging in this kind of work, feel intimidating. There's a lot of trappings to it that don't feel as welcoming as like a community center or a Grange Hall, which is really, you know, going where people are and sort of meeting them on their turf and us being their guests. And so I really think it's important that we think about all the ways we can be as accessible to constituents as a body, whether that's doing our business or having sort of town hall or conversations or whatever that is, in places that are really accessible and where people feel comfortable and welcome and at their best, and where we're their guests. And unfortunately, you know, we're just not safe yet to do that in person. So I think, yeah, keeping tabs on it, and for any and all of us when we are interacting with folks as much as we can, to maybe just think about, I will certainly start thinking about asking folks how they would like to see, you know, what would help them feel that their commission was more accessible to them in that way, and just start kind of collecting ideas in the hopes that not too long here, it will be a safe thing for us to do, to gather in person in some other locations. I just really want to point out, I don't think the accessibility issue is only about geography. I think it's about the culture of the setting as well.
Well, unless Commissioner Bozovich, you want to weigh in, I'm hearing that for different reasons now might not be the time. Did you want to say something?
Actually, I'll try and, you know, as somebody that asked for the evening meetings and supported them when they originally started, you know, I don't think it's a bad idea if we hold another one sometime in the future, just to see if there's still interest in them. But I'll defer to the agenda team to decide that or not. I will say, you know, as far as going remote, those have been fairly popular, usually because we had a region-specific item that we were going to start talking about. You know, like when we went to Florence, we were talking about our participation financially in their highway and project there that was going to revitalize downtown and add all the various you know, waypoints and entries into Old Town. So it was a very specific regional and had a lot of interest, because the city was also going to have to make a significant investment along with ODOT in that project. Oak Ridge, we were, you know, hearing a gravel mining permit. Definitely brings the people there. So part of that, getting that interest in going to those regional areas, is actually having something on the agenda that region's interested in. The secondary thing is we need to go someplace that has broadband access and that Metro TV can set up in, for the most part, so we can actually get our meetings recorded and webcast. So the Grange Hall out there at Spencer Creek is not exactly going to make it. So that's all I just want to say. But I'm open and will make myself available if the board decides to do another evening.
Thank you. Thank you all for your input, and Vice Chair and I will follow up with agenda setting. I also would just like to share, I feel great about this. I hope most of you do, that I just learned yesterday that not only are 3 school districts across the state and 1 city looking at Lane County's community benefits agreement model and strongly considering utilizing it, but there's also now a task force being set up at ODOT for statewide, for them to look at this model and apply it with appropriate construction projects. So I just wanted to share that with the board as well. I think we can all feel really good about that. Future board assignments, anyone? I see no future board assignments.
I see Commissioner Bozovich's hand.
Yeah, but I don't. So.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Yes, Commissioner.
So I have not so much a board assignment, but a request for the agenda team. Today's meeting is one of multiple examples where if things don't run exactly on 5-0 votes with no discussion, we run out of time. we have got to build time in our schedule for the board to actually deliberate and make decisions. Otherwise, we're not acting as a board. You know, I should be able to bring up questions on anything before the board and have an opportunity to discuss it and even make alternative motions, because that's my function as a board member. And I feel like, you know, for several meetings, we've packed things so tight that that is not an opportunity. So I just would like to ask the agenda team to think about how they're scheduling. We do have Wednesdays available. I don't mind meeting Wednesday mornings either. You know, that if we need to do that, but I would rather build in flexibility into that board schedule so we can really discuss items. Otherwise, you know, we might as well not meet. We might as well just have staff assume everything was a 5-0 vote and we'll move on from there. So then my second question, though, that's just a request to the agenda team, doesn't need head nods or anything. But my second question is, I want to get back to what I was starting to request this morning. Is now the time I make that motion and request, or do you want me to do that under other business, Chair?
Why don't you do it now? Because I think the intent is after review of assignments to go into executive session and then end there.
So,
and I do see Mr. Rickoff who gave that a thumbs up.
Commissioner Buck has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. I just wanted to let you know that I have an item under other business, which is the letter I mentioned this morning. So I was hoping that we would deal with that prior to going into executive session.
Oh, see, Rickoff, you can't do thumbs up to both. It's one or the other.
I'll defer and go after the letter because I think that'll be a very brief item.
Well, why don't we thank you both? And I'm trying to roll with this. So my suggestion is, first, let's ask for if there are any board assignment requests. And then let's do other, right? So that we can kind of catch everything and then we'll move forward. So are there any board assignment requests? Seeing none. And now that Commissioner Fart has paused, I just want to say, Commissioner Bozovich, it's all his fault.
I'm still here, just paused on my audio.
Darn. It's like voluntary, right? Commissioner Butt, please. And then back to Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. So as I mentioned, there was a letter that staff would like the board chair to sign on our behalf regarding interim housing on rural lands. You all were able to see it, I hope, during the day at some point. If you would like, I think it would be prudent if I read it because the public hasn't seen it. It's only 2 paragraphs, but the request is that we approve the chair to sign this on the board's behalf. So it's regarding Lane County support for interim housing on rural lands on the 2021 through 2023 policy agenda. It's to the chair of and the commission itself of LCDC. The Lane County Board of Commissioners, the board, respectfully requests that the Department of Land Conservation and Development and Land Conservation and Development Commission to consider rulemaking modeled after the July 2020 rules OAR 660-014-0080 to create opportunities for interim sheltering on lands outside the urban growth boundaries, UBGs, for individuals and families displaced by natural hazards and for people displaced by the housing crisis. Lane County has one of the largest per capita unhoused populations in the state. And while the devastating wildfires of 2020 exacerbated our county's housing crisis, the availability of housing, particularly affordable housing, has been a chronic issue that predates the fires. The board applauds the rulemaking work that has been done to expand interim sheltering options for fire survivors and encourages both DLCD and LCDC to build on this important work and expand rules to address our larger unhoused population. Several counties share our perspective prioritizing and funding this initiative is of statewide importance and should be initiated this biennium. Sincerely, the chair.
Is that how you sign the chair?
It will have your name for sure.
I think, is all we need head nods here? Or do we need a motion?
That's a great question. And Chair Bernie, I do not have the answer. Diana?
Just head nods.
Okay. I see head nods and thumbs up. I've added them up and they come to 7. So I think we will move forward with that. Is there anything else, Commissioner Buck?
No, thank you very much. And it'd be great to coordinate this through AOC as well.
As fate would have it, by the way, I will be on a call with Gene and Nicole tomorrow, so I'll put a bug in. Commissioner Bozovich, I think we're back to you.
Thank you. So in a continuation of what I brought up this morning, we have data that clearly shows the vaccine disparity by race. And we are getting ready to implement a mandate for our employees. We're at October 12th. The mandate's effective November 30th. It takes at least 5 weeks to become fully vaccinated. I don't think there's any doubt that we're going to have a disproportionate impact on minorities. So I would like to move this board direct the county administrator to stop the implementation of a vaccine mandate for COVID-19 for Lane County employees until further notice from this board.
Second.
You want to repeat the motion? I'll just say it's been moved and seconded.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So this board to direct.
We're going to orchestrate this together. Commissioner Bozovich moved and Vice Chair Farr seconded the following motion, please.
Yeah. To direct the county administrator to stop further action on a COVID-19 vaccine mandate for Lane County employees until further notice from this board.
So that's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion to the motion? Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I think part of this motion really is the direction to strip the authority of our administrator, who currently is the one to be able to make those particular decisions. I'm not prepared to do that. I think he is working within his authority that we've been granted. And I think this would be a bad move.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Vice Chair Farr had his hand up.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to mention why I seconded this, and it's because of the point that Commissioner Bozovich mentioned earlier, one that I have not seen hard data on, but I'm very interested in seeing the data regarding the discriminatory nature of the potential vaccination requirement. Based upon the Commissioner Bozovich cited information that there is a greater reluctance due to a trust factor of people of color or people in certain minority represented groups to access vaccination because of historical trust issues. I don't know that for certain, but I'm certainly not interested in that being a discriminatory factor in the actual employment of Lane County employees.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there any other commissioner that would like to speak to this? I do see it this time, Commissioner Bozovich, but I wanted to see if there was anyone else first. And yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
So I'll just say that this is the board's purview to direct the county administrator as far as policy goes. In fact, the county administrator felt it was important enough to consult a quorum of the board and get our feelings about implementing this in the first place. And it was in those executive sessions, I originally raised this issue of disproportionate vaccination rates. And I questioned it then that I thought it was going to cause a problem by race and of dismissing employees at a greater rate that are people of color. And I said it back then, and I'll say it now. I think this is an extension of institutional racism and is going to create a legal mess for us. The state has taken this on and the federal government's taking this on. There's no need for Lane County to take this on beyond what they're doing and put our taxpayers at risk for paying off lawsuits. In addition to this, just doesn't fit with everything else that we talk about constantly here as a board and in the county. Equity and getting rid of institutional racism. We know there is a disparity by race. And we know there's going to be a disproportionate impact. And because of our governor's policies around unemployment benefits, we also know that those folks are going to end up with no income that we dismiss. And we're going to have a higher rate of minority folks we dismiss due to this. And it's been estimated that it's going to be between 8 and 10% of our workforce. But that's going to be maybe 6% of our white workforce and 12% of our black workforce. I don't think I like those numbers. So I believe we have the authority to direct the county administrator to stop this policy. It's within our purview. He works for us. We work for the citizens of Lane County.
Thank you, Commissioner. By the way, I really want to commend you. You're now our poster child for equity and institutional racism. Forgive me, but I know I shouldn't have said that, but you got to admit, I want to clarify my view on institutional racism. My view on institution, because we say that word a lot. Institutional racism really are systems that exclude certain groups from full participation in the benefits a society has to offer, whether that's housing or employment, etc. That's what institutional racism in my lifetime actually has meant. I completely, we've had no opportunity to really rethink this, although I know Commissioner Bozovich has been beaten on this drum for quite a while. And believe strongly about it. And at the same time, believe strongly in getting vaccinations, right, Commissioner? I mean, you've made that clear. But I'm not going to vote in anything in haste. We already dealt with this in terms of releasing executive committee, which really had some negative impacts on staff morale, but it would have been more negative, I think, if we didn't, given the accusation that was made. And I'm absolutely not, especially with Mr. Mokrzycki not here, I'm absolutely not. And we have multiple weeks here that this could be reconsidered if people wanted to, but I'm not like on a moment's notice, on the fly, right now with a motion that it hasn't, there's no material on this in our agenda docket. I'm not going to vote in favor of this. That's me, but we have 5 of us. This motion has been made and seconded. Yes, Vice Chair Farr. You're muted, sir.
All right, I purposely muted myself. I'll say this out loud. I'll be voting against this motion, even though I seconded it. I wanted to have the discussion out loud and also to signal to Mr. Rickoff and Mr. Mokrzycki that this is not something that we are interested in any stretch of the imagination. If it does have disparate impact, then we need to know about it. We need to take action upon that immediately. And Chair Bernie, I'm not certain that your definition of institutional racism excludes Commissioner Bozovich's concerns. Thank you.
Well, I wish I could say I was certain, but you're probably right. Is there any other discussion and thank you, Vice Chair. Is there any other discussion to the motion? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Krieger.
Thank you, Chair. I won't go into all the whys and wherefores of why I will not be supporting this motion, but I believe if it's at all possible, I would like to ask Mr. Rickoff if we might be able to get the data that Commissioner Bozovich is making a lot of suppositions about our workforce and what the data actually looks like as it applies to our workforce and how our own workforce will be impacted. So I'm wondering if there is a chance we might be able to get that data, and by when, in terms of vaccination rates by race and ethnicity within our own workforce, and how this policy will impact specifically with a racial equity lens.
Chair Bernie, Commissioner Trieger, happy to bring that back next week. That will not take long to put together.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I want to echo what Commissioners Trieger and Farr said, and that is, if you recall, during the COVID-19 report, I also requested a little more granular data as it related to vaccinated versus unvaccinated, as it related to one of the public testimony. The first one identified that 90% or something related of COVID-19 deaths had to do with age, right? Over 60 and multiple chronic conditions, of which I sadly fall into that category. So I think we're going to be looking at more data, and there's more time to deal with this. But is there any other commissioner before we take a vote? Seeing none. Commissioner Bozovich, I'm going to try and do this, but correct me if I'm wrong, please. The motion that was made by Commissioner Bozovich and seconded by Vice Chair Farr to direct the administrator to rescind the decision to require vaccinations of Lane County employees?
Pretty close, yeah.
Close enough for you? Really, that's the, okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was to direct them to stop implementation and further notice from this board, which doesn't preclude us after getting data implementing it. But that's
right. But the doesn't preclude us part is not part of the motion. So
yeah, no.
Okay. All those in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
No. Let the record show, and really, Mr. Rickoff, you could consult with Mr. Bozovich on the exact wording, but let the record show that that motion made by Commissioner Bozovich, seconded by Vice Chair Farr, was denied 4 votes to 1, Commissioner Bozovich in the minority. And now, as if we weren't having enough fun, it is review of assignments time. Mr. Rickoff?
Chair Bernie, it is my understanding that the only assignment I have will be for Steve Mokryski to bring back demographic information. Please understand that because of the 11:30 timeline and the work going on with bargaining units, there's still a lot at play, but we can certainly give you what we have. At this point, it'll be a snapshot in time as opposed to a fairly comprehensive piece. But Steve Mokryski will be bringing that back to you next week. Yes, sir.
Oh, no. Please continue. Commissioner Bozovich had his hand up.
And then it is my understanding the return of the land use issue around footprint does not need to be an assignment because it already is one. Is that accurate, Vice Chair Farr? Okay, so that's all I have. Please tell me what I missed.
Is the letter that Commissioner Buck had that we all agreed to, is that an assignment?
I believe with the work of Diana Jones that we could probably mark that assignment already completed.
Thank you. I'm trying to move forward, but yes, you did have your hand up, Commissioner Bozovich.
I was just going to request, if it's not available, I'll understand, but if there's any data relative to veteran status on vaccination rate, because I do know we have a veterans preference in hiring, and that's another place where I believe there's a disproportionate vaccination rate.
And I don't have the answer to that, but I'll find that out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. It is now 3:45. After Ms. Jones reads us into executive session, how about we reconvene at 3:55 and give us 10 minutes? Is that okay? Vice Chair Farr?
That is okay, Chair Bernie. Prior to reading this into executive session, this executive session is on AFSCME, and I'll declare a potential conflict of interest. My son is a mental health therapist and a member of AFSCME and a steward for that union. I do not perceive an actual conflict of interest. I will participate in the discussion throughout the executive session.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And Ms. Jones, if you would.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. This is the executive session for Tuesday, October 12th. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive sessions to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out into public session should the need arise.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. See you in 10 minutes.